You're listening to the Dueling Pistols podcast, where we read and discuss the stories of our past and explore some of the most wild adventures from modern history.
No, bro. George Washington said, stay strapped or get clapped, and I'm all about that. I ain't,
Floyd had split his surveying party into 3 groups.
Bro, you never split up. Never split up. You seen Scooby-Doo? Nothing good happens when the group splits.
As they tried to drag the canoe to the shore, Fanny Calloway beat him over the head with the paddle until it broke.
Good job, Fanny.
When the man in front goes down, pick up his rifle and shoot.
I hate this guy.
Yeah?
I hate this guy. I want him dead. I want him to die, and die a somewhat miserable death.
We ain't like the British. We dissed everything, including the accent.
One of the Shawnees killed that day was the son of the man who would become Boone's captor and adoptive father.
Wow. Bro, this is like a freaking soap opera. That is ridiculous. Does he have an evil twin that's going to pop out sometime too?
Triggered by Black Flag.
Welcome back to the show. I am your host, Brian Cole, and I'm joined by my brother, Brent Call. How are you, Brent?
Well, thank you.
Good. So we're back to the book. Last episode, Daniel Boone was jumping off cliffs, landing in sugar maples, shimmying down, controlled falling, running away from Indians up on the cliffs, and then
fell with style,
and diving into a river and swimming across and leaving the Indians on the bank. Like, what the heck? That was, yeah. Nobody chased him. They let him go. Other stories, he is out there basically with his brother Squire, but then alone. But in essence, he's 3 years, basically. I think he's about 3 years in Kentucky, exploring it, figuring it all out. Then he and Squire, his brother, make their way back from Kentucky through the Cumberland Gap. They have a hoard of furs. They've had their furs.
It only took them 2 or 3 years to get it all.
They've had their furs each year, it seems. They were eventually robbed by Indians, and the Indians took everything.
And the Indians just so happened to show up every time they had a mountain of furs. Not before.
Well, the first time happened, and it was Captain Emery.
Yeah.
Who is not really a captain. He is the chief of the Shawnee Indians. And it's a whole group of them who came into Kentucky. I don't know how many, 10, something like that. And when that happened, they're all like, we out, peace. And they all left, except for John Stewart
and
Daniel Boone. And John Stewart is Daniel Boone's brother-in-law. And they were all actually leaving, and they had been robbed. Remember, this is when Daniel goes back and tries to steal the horses from the Indians. They actually steal some horses, and then they get caught stealing the horses. And everything goes badly in that regard, except they do escape. And fast forward, you have Squire Boone. As the whole group is heading back to the Yadkin or North Carolina, they're like, we're done. This is too much. We wasted a whole year here, blah, blah, blah. Daniel runs into his brother, Squire, and Neely. And so Neely and Alexander Neely and Squire Boone, they bump into Daniel, and they have fresh supplies and horses and traps and everything and food. So Daniel and John Stewart are like, well, let's go back. So they go back. And then during the course of that period, John Stewart dies or disappears. Actually, at this point, he's disappeared.
Yeah.
Which is traumatic, for Boone, it's probably his closest friend.
And it's probably another reason why he ended up staying out there a little bit longer.
Because
you got to give John time.
Alexander and Squire go back with all their loot, all their bounty, nature's bounty, back to civilization, and Squire pays off some debts and takes care of things, and then he comes back by himself. Alexander Neely stays in the settlements. So Squire Boone comes back. But in these windows of time, Daniel is truly alone by himself. He is 100% solo. There are no other people out there. And so his brother does show up, and then him and his brother trapped for another year. Then they head back. So last we left off, they were going through the Cumberland Gap. They got through it, and they actually ran into Alexander Neely, who was the ghost of a man, apparition.
That was bizarre.
He was coming through with another group just on their way out to get some bounty, and he got lost. So he fired all his gunpowder, wandered around, starving to death, ended up killing, looked like a domestic dog, somebody's dog, and ate it. But the meat had maggots in it as he was like near death. And
he tried to smoke it, didn't do so hot.
He ran into Boone Squire and Daniel Boone, both of them. He ran into the brothers and he was like, "Oh, you're near death." And they nursed him back to health. And then shortly after, they got mugged and robbed by Indians and got everything taken from them. And so that is where we're at now. They are now headed back to the Yadkin in North Carolina, and they have nothing. And 3 years have gone by.
Oof.
So let's talk about this. So basically, Boone is poorer than he was before he left. You know, in essence. I mean, Squire did pay off some of his debts, but we're just going to get right into the book here and kind of resume this story. And I'm warning you, it gets a little dark. It gets a little dark. So in 1772 to 1774, this is the span we're talking about here. The 4 years from 71 to 75 were frustrating for Boone. His overwhelming desire was to settle in Kentucky and bring his family and friends there. His dream was to hunt in Kentucky and live in peace with the Indians on the Bluegrass Island. Almost everything he did was aimed at this overriding goal. But between his desire and its fulfillment lay hundreds of miles of dangerous mountains, the opposition of the governors of North Carolina and Virginia, the land grabbing of large entrepreneurs and political leaders, lack of funds, and outbreaks of fighting between Indians and whites on the frontier. The early 1770s was a time of roadblocks, hurdles, detours, digressions, and disturbances caused by the regulators in North Carolina. Remember, we talked about the regulators last week. They were like kind of sick and tired of the colonial governments, which were extensions of the British Empire, telling the people what to do. So groups formed themselves. They called themselves the regulators, and they were standing in opposition to what they felt was a tyrannical governorship or tyrannical leadership over the people as an extension of the British Empire. And it says, and it does sound like they were quite corrupt. When Daniel reached his farm on the Yadkin after 24 months away, so it was 2 years, robbed of his furs and even his rifle, he was poorer than when he had started out in May of 1769. Some of his debts had been paid by Squire the year before, but more had been incurred for supplies for the second winter in the wilderness and by his family while he was away. So his family borrowed money too. With accumulating interest, the debts had grown and were still growing. According to Archibald Henderson, the reports of his extended explorations, which he had made to Judge Henderson, were soon communicated to the other partners of the land company, and their letters bristle with glowing and minute descriptions of the country as detailed by their agent. Though the Louisa Company was not formally organized until 3 years later, subsequent testimony makes it clear Henderson and the others were already thinking of purchasing Kentucky lands from the Cherokees, perhaps as early as 1768. So you have all these entrepreneurs, established men out there trying to build their fortune and their wealth and their future, right? Mm-hmm. Some of them are political leaders in the community. Most are. They also are, the wealthy in the community. They have the farms, they have the money, they have all of that. And they're looking to move westward, build cities, own those cities, own the lands, get things established. Because think about it. If you're a wealthy guy and you can buy up a whole bunch of land that no one has touched, and it's like pristine, beautiful land, right? And you get it for nothing because nobody lives there yet. And you fund the railroad, cruising in there. You fund the streets. You fund some of the buildings, the general store. Mm-hmm. You basically, in essence, build a town for people to come to. And if you can get enough people to come to it and fill it up because of the risks you took in the exploration, the establishment, all that kind of stuff, you become the founder of the town and the most wealthy man there, right? And so a lot of speculators and land grabbers and investors were all looking to do this. Get it for cheap, just like developers today. Get some land, develop it, sell it. And so this is what you have going on right now. there's all sorts of political things going on where what you end up with is the Indians, they're buying the land from the Indians. Like they're trying to make it appear as though they, each landowner is like, hey, or wealthy guys like, hey, let's meet with some Indians, buy the land from them. Then we have a piece of paper that says it's ours. And whoever think about it, whoever can kind of convince people that it's theirs, it's theirs. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you have one landowner buying it from this group of Indians, and you have another group buying it from this group of Indians. But then who can ever settle it first sort of gets it.
Ooh, that's dirty.
It's dirty. And it gets dirtier and dirtier throughout this time frame. So Boone just was like, that money's not his thing, man. And neither is civilization. And so it goes on to say, though his 2 years in Kentucky were a failure in any accountant's ledger, they could be seen as a triumph when measured in other ways. Though he returned empty-handed, he had found the Bluegrass Island. He had seen Kentucky and traveled it from one end to the other, and he had survived. He had found the defile to the west and stood on a high peak in the Knob country. He had seen more deer, bears, and buffalo than he could describe, and he had seen the wonders of the caves, the salt licks, the mammoth bones, the sweeping savannas of bluegrass, clover, and cane, and followed the Kentucky River to the wide curving procession of the Ohio. He had found the falls of the Ohio and the valley of the Green River, and followed the Cumberland to the French Lick.
Mammoth bones.
Yeah.
That's cool.
What's so crazy, is, think about that. Like what he accomplished in those years, the lands he had seen, what he had discovered, like he was worth something. He had some value that transcended material, like furs and goods in your hands. There's something else he gained that is both, the knowledge in his head, but also in personal growth. And the book says the most valuable thing he had accomplished, he probably could not have put into words. At the cost of loneliness and worry about his family far away over the mountains, he had evaded Indians and endured cold and wind, floods and summer heat, flies and snakes, wolves and capture. He had lost his close friend and brother-in-law, John Stewart. He had been robbed twice of everything, but his victory was something that had happened within him. He was a different man from the one who had set out from the Yadkin in 1769. Alone in the wilderness, he had found something in himself beyond the thrill of hunting, beyond the vision of profit from commerce in hides and furs and ginseng. Whatever the looks and muttering of his neighbors as he returned again empty-handed from his voyage, and whatever the unpleasant duns and demands from creditors, he felt richer as he resumed his life on the Yadkin. It was time for spring planting. Everyone who knew Boone knew he was in some important way a different man. Some did not approve of that difference, but they recognized it. His peculiar ability to rise above enormous setbacks and keep his thoughts on other things is one example of his difference. Some called it naivete, others laziness, and still others accused him of indifference to his family. From their perspectives, they may have been partly right. The thoughts that occupied Boone were not always intelligible to others. Most intelligent and practical people who had returned from 2 years in the wilderness broke would have settled down to business the way that his friend Henry Miller had years earlier. But Boone was different. I mean, in so many ways, I just relate to Boone. I know Ryan does too. Lampers, there's such a, civilization holds so little. I mean, it's definitely got its perks, but there's something about carving your existence out in the mountains, alone, living and sustaining yourself for weeks on end, sometimes months on end, like we've done. Getting meat from the wild, experiencing nature, living there hand to mouth every day, having to find out where you're going to get your water from, build your shelter, chop your wood, stay warm, stay dry, stay upbeat, keep pursuing the game you're after day after day after day. It's like you become more and more primal by the hour, 10 days in, 12 days in, 16 days in on a solo archery elk hunt, and you finally kill a bull. there's something that changes you. You're different. And you come back. Now, imagine all of that, but stacked upon it is the threat of being killed by a horde of Indians.
Yeah, no, not my favorite idea.
You're going to grow. You're going to be different. You're going to, first of all, you faced danger over and over. You faced hunger and cold and all of that. And when you come back to civilization, I think it's not unlike a warrior coming back from war. You come back and you're like, life isn't as exciting and deep and meaningful. I mean, before you're out there under threat of constant death and you feel more alive. You feel at peace in a way that you come back to civilization and you're like, this is also meaningless. All this like pursuit of material things and the trappings of wealth just seem to be so empty and pointless in the absence of adventure. I listened to a show the other day. It was a talk or something. And in that, the gentleman was saying there's a lot of chaos in the world and a lot of hardships and dark things that will come your way, from disease to natural disasters to betrayal and the evils of mankind. And he said one of the greatest antidotes to that, to find meaning in life, is adventure. Adventure. What a worthy endeavor to dive into, to sort of help combat the vicissitudes of life, the struggles of life, and I think, hey man. And one of the things that he proposed was, one adventure you could have is to always be truthful. There's one. Like,
ooh, that's a different kind of adventure.
Where will that take you? Anyway, it was an interesting idea. I clipped to the video. Might share it someday, but I liked what he said. Adventure can infuse you with a renewed vigor for life, And so Boone is back in civilization. Here he is dealing with this situation. And as is so interesting, the people in town thought he might be lazy, called him naive, didn't understand his values. But who he was emulating in a way? The Native Americans whom he, which were his protagonists. But he, in many ways, actually was like, why are you guys doing all this when you could just be out there free and taking in nature? And, he's truly a man of nature. It's not, it's silly having spent some time climbing mountains and backpacking into remote areas and skinning and preparing hides, and to call the man lazy is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Like, some of the hardships and struggles and the toughness and the grit that he had to have was
you can't
through
live
the
out in
roof.
the woods for a year and be lazy.
And so to say, could call that lazy is just silly. That certainly wasn't it. To call him naive, it's not that. It's that their values were so different. His values had to be so different than those he was surrounded by. And they just didn't understand the values that were innate in Boone, And it continues to say, Boone was different. As far as is known, Boone returned to the business of farming and local hunting in 1771. His daughter Rebecca had been born on May 26, 1768, and his son Daniel Morgan in 69, almost 8 months after he left for Kentucky. It is quite possible that was the birth that gave rise to the legend that one of the Boone children was illegitimate. His next child was Jesse in 73. If Rebecca was angry at him for his long stay in Kentucky, no comment to that effect has come down to us in the many interviews with descendants and relatives and his friends. A missionary named George Sewell preached along the Yadkin in 71 and recorded in his diary meeting the wife of Nathaniel Boone. He says, Miss Boone was the daughter of Joseph Bryant. This likely is Rebecca, and he mistook Daniel for Nathaniel, her son. And it says, Miss Boone expressed fears and uncertainty. She is by nature a quiet soul and of few words. She told me of her need and that her heart was often restless and anxious, though then the feelings would again leave her. She cannot read. I heard her gladly and told her of the loving heart of Jesus open to her, and bade her to turn to him whenever she was by day or night. She seems less earnest in the matter than he, but has more feeling. It is possible that Daniel had to sleep on the couch for a while as her resentment cooled or wore itself out, but there is no testimony to that effect. In any case, Daniel's long absence gave her a rest from the almost continuous effort of childbearing, which was common among all women on the frontier. Mm-hmm. A better story of Daniel's reunion with Rebecca in 71 was told to Draper by one John B. Rourke. When he reached the Beaver Creek on the upper Yadkin, Daniel found that his family had gone to a neighborhood frolic. Arriving at the dance, he realized he was so disheveled and his beard and hair so long no one recognized him. He went up to Rebecca and asked for a dance. When she drew back, he said, "You need not refuse me, for you have danced many a time with me." Rebecca recognized his voice and tears filled her eyes as she hugged him. That sounds like a Hollywood story.
That's cute.
Yeah. The neighbors were amazed to see her hug this old unkempt hunter. Then they too recognized him, and he entered the company of all evening with tales, entertained his company all evening with tales of his adventures in the Kentucky. Somewhere in the middle is probably the truth. It says they moved west to Watauga. So backstory, Daniel he was in debt, bunch of debt. He didn't value a lot of this stuff. He borrowed the money, planned to pay it back. He has this sort of, everything is going to work out in the end, rosy outlook. Some might call it delusional. And so he borrowed all that money and then he lost it. And he borrowed that money and he lost it because he lost those hides and everything else. So here he is in debt and he's constantly being heckled and stuff. The thing is, Daniel has a lot in his mind about the Kentucky region. And who does he owe the money to? The wealthy people in town. What do the wealthy people in town want?
Kentucky.
They want Kentucky. So he has leverage and they have leverage. They need him to do things for them and he owes them money. And so you're going to see things play out. The settlement in the Watauga Valley had begun around 1769, just as Boone was leaving for Kentucky. So a few years later, by now, 2 years later, the Watauga Valley was more settled than before. And it was west of the Yadkin. And he just keeps moving further and further west into more frontier type areas. That comment about he needs more elbow room, It says that though sanctioned by neither the colonial government of North Carolina nor Virginia, they would become the first white community west of North Carolina Blue Ridge. Lord Dunmore, the governor of Virginia, wrote at this time, "Watauga sets a dangerous example to people of America of forming government distinct from and independent of His Majesty's authority." So they're setting up new places, they're moving, and the Majesty, the British Empire, is not able to keep up with each settlement as they start forming their own sort of little governments because they need to. So you can see what's happening here as the colonial settlers start to become more and more independent of the British Empire and less involved with the British Empire. And the British Empire wants to exercise authority. It just keeps it's just like they're growing like wildfire and spreading. Though often neglected by historians, the Watauga experiment set a precedent with far-reaching significance. It was a model for other independent communities such as Transylvania, Cumberland, and the state of Franklin.
The state of Franklin.
Mm-hmm. It was about this time that Richard Henderson, whose term as a judge was coming to an end, he began to formally set in motion his scheme, which he had been pondering for years, to buy Kentucky. The whole thing. He knew the colonial governments of North Carolina and Virginia, following the Royal Proclamation of 1763, forbade the private purchase and settlement of land west of the mountains. Henderson had to be especially careful to conceal his scheme, because he feared, on the one hand, the anger of citizens who resented his status and wealth, and on the other hand, the wrath of the colonial governors who had forbidden civilian purchases of Western land. He wants to buy up all this land, but that's going to piss off the poor people and stuff who are like, who do you think you are? and he's already rich. And so everybody hates a rich guy. And then you have the government of the British Empire saying, yeah, no cities being built. No. You think about the reality on the ground at that time. What are they going to do if 5,000 settlers just start putting up a city in Kentucky?
Not a whole lot.
And a whole bunch of others start coming in, 50,000 people. Like, they're just going to be like, okay, well, I guess this is a new spot we're settling in. You know, He's fully aware of that. That's the reality that's been happening year over year. So you can make a law, but, you know, people are up against what is a law and what is reality. So continuing on, it says that he had to prevent competitors as well as Indians from knowing his plans. George Washington had instructed his own agent in the Ohio Valley to survey land there under the guise of hunting game. Good old George.
What you doing? Oh, surveying.
Hunting.
Oh, that's about hunting.
Hunting. Nothing. The survey chain, whatever, you know. Boone's first attempt to settle in Kentucky was a joint venture, not with Henderson, but with a man named William Russell, an important trader, landowner, and captain of militia, who had already settled in the extreme southwestern corner of Virginia in the Clinch River. Boone appears to have been hired on as a scout and guide, and Russell held military warrants primarily intended for use on land east of the mountains. But he hoped the government of Virginia would recognize claims as he might make in Kentucky also. Boone was only one of several long hunters who served as guides and partners to the land speculators. While the long hunters were mostly interested in hunting and exploration in Kentucky, some would return there to claim land and build settlements, and several, including Boone, served as scouts and advisors to the large entrepreneurs and land speculators. The hunters were essential to the surveyors and developers because they were familiar with the unclaimed and barely charted region. So you just got all these guys pretending to be hunters, sneaking in, and they're hoping that if they survey land and they do it first, they can somehow finagle their way into the ownership of that place and then claim it, you know. So Boone is moving, though. He's like getting closer to Kentucky. He wants to move into Kentucky, but right now, well, they do move west to Watauga, but then they do start saying, okay, let's move to Kentucky. So it says a warrant was issued for Boone's arrest in Virginia. It was either Cowan, Draper, Henderson, like one of these rich guys was like, I'll just cover your warrant and pay some things off for you so you can go and do what I want you to do. And that's kind of what happens. And so as a result of that, Boone is told, we command you to take Daniel Boone and William Cowan if they be found, capture them, blah, blah, blah. But Cowan returned and he paid the bill because he got paid by some of these rich guys to go and settle some country. Anyway, moving ahead. They're moving. It says, there were many farewells between family and friends who were leaving the Yadkin and those who were staying. Daniel's mother, Sarah Morgan, and a few others accompanied the immigrants for half a day before saying their final farewell. Sarah was now in her 70s, and both mother and son knew it was likely the last time they would ever see each other. It was she who had taught him tolerance and patience, a delight in the world around him, a reverence for life. Her gift for calm acceptance was an essential part of his nature. He had inherited her tendency toward attention and joy. It had been said that both Daniel and his mother wept freely as they parted. This was one of the several occasions Daniel is reported to have wept. For all his reputation as a stoic, he was apparently not a man to hold back his tears. On February 15, 1773, Reverend George Soule recorded in his diary a meeting with Sarah Morgan Boone. I visited William Bryant and the old sick Mother Boone. She is a Quaker by birth, but very eager for grace and the forgiveness of her sins. She was very glad that I came to her, and it was given to me to tell her of the grace through the blood of Jesus for all poor, longing souls, to which she listened with many tears. By the middle of August, the party from the Yadkin had reached Russell's settlement at Castlewood on the Clinch River. There they packed belongings in hickory baskets to be strapped on their side of pack horses, much like they were called panniers in England, for there was no road for wagons and carts into Kentucky. Babies as well as chickens and little pigs were carried on the baskets tied to wooden pack saddles, while some of the women and children would ride, at least for some of the time. Men and boys drove the hogs and cattle and led the horses.
That sounds like a fun trip to be making. Can I strap a piggy to your back?
It says, they make their trip. Stoner, whose original name was Holsteiner, was born in Pennsylvania of German parents in 1748 and left his apprenticeship with a saddle maker to be a woodsman in the western lands. He would become one of Boone's favorite hunting companions, and he was already known as an expert marksman. Stoner was an awkward Dutchman, a low, chunky man, Nathan Boone told Draper. He became a good woodsman, as he was truthful and reliable. In almost every case, frontiersmen were remembered and honored more for character and dependability than for marksmanship or scouting ability, Boone included. In the dangerous world of the West, integrity counted above all else. The colonial governments of Virginia and North Carolina had warned settlers not to cross the mountains into Cherokee and Shawnee hunting lands. At the Treaty of Hard Labor, South Carolina, in 1768, the British government had conceded to the Cherokees the rights to the western region of Kentucky. The frontier was too wide, and a gathering tide of spectators and settlers were too powerful to be stopped, though. Lord Dunmore viewed those settling on the frontier with skepticism and despair. He's one of the governors, I believe. Americans do and will remove as their avidity and restlessness incite them. They acquire no attachment to place, but wandering about seems engrafted in their nature. And it is a weakness incident to it that they should forever imagine the lands further off are still better than those upon which they are already settled.
I think that is just human nature in play right there. I don't think it has anything to do with just Americans. I think the Europeans probably would have done that if they had the capability to be able to travel wherever they wanted to.
Yeah, certainly there is an explorer's heart that people have where they just want to see what's around the next bend. Mm-hmm. It says, and great men with official ties to the colonial government, such as George Washington, William Russell, Patrick Henry, Richard Henderson, and 100 others, and indeed the colonial governors themselves, could not resist the opportunities that Kentucky promised. In fact, Lord Dunmore had sent his own surveyors into the wilderness, but found it wise to distance himself from their activities. They're all secretly doing it. Mm-hmm. It says that they all deny it. One of the lawyers advising Dunmore was Patrick Henry, who had his own plans for buying land from the Cherokees. The colonial governments could no more stop the gathering rush into Kentucky than they could have curbed a flood with a sieve. It was a story that could be repeated again and again until the great valleys of California and Oregon were settled and the farthest plains of North Dakota. Basically till they ran into the ocean. Moving livestock and a pack train of horses through the wilderness on a scarcely visible trail was very slow work. Most livestock in the wilderness had bells on their necks, and Nathan Boone said that bells were put on horses to prevent them from getting lost. The party labored over Horton's Summit. Because their progress was so slow, Boone saw that they would need extra provisions, and he sent his son James back to Castlewood with John and Richard Mendenhall for additional supplies. William Russell, who had remained behind to finish the business and then follow with the second party, gathered the extra goods and horses and cattle and sent a guide named Crabtree and a hired man named Drake, as well as his oldest son Henry Russell and 2 slaves named Adam and Charles to help the boys carry the supplies and drive livestock over the mountains. On the night of October 9, 1773, James Boone, Henry Russell, and the rest of the party camped along the trail near where Wallens Creek runs into Powell's River. They did not realize they were only 3 miles behind the main party. As the boys sat around the campfire, wolves began howling, and Crabtree laughed to see how startled his young companions were when he told them they would hear wolves howling in the treetops in Kentucky. These are kids, or just naive. Like, I sure as hell ain't sitting around a campfire at this point, like in Indian country. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I just feel like there are people built to survive and people who are not. Now, it's easy to judge from here, but they were only 3 miles from the rest of the group. As they slept, a group of 15 Delawares and 2 Shawnees and at least 3 Cherokees watched from the woods.
Ooh.
Again, so there is like, you got James Boone, you got William Russell, John Richard Mendenhall, you got the 2 hired men, you got Drake and his oldest son, Henry Russell, and then you got the 2 slaves, Adam and Charles. That's 7 men, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have 15 Indians watching them. Now, if you're in freaking Indian country, I can tell you now, like the way that I am about a grizzly bear potentially, like the cautiousness with which we try to navigate the mountains. I just don't understand how you are so not careful about, like, you know, where you're sleeping, how you're sleeping. If you're, is no one awake? Is no one standing guard?
I was going to say, who's on watch?
Are you all lit up by a fire? Or are you not starting a fire so you don't bring attention to yourself in the dark? Are you hiding, making any effort to put your bed or your sleeping spot in a fortified position? Are you all in the same exact spot so you can all be taken out at once, or are you spread out? You know, like so many, like, because Daniel Boone didn't survive 2 years by doing this.
No.
You know, sleeping in cane breaks, keeping fires hidden, caves. You know what I mean? And you just think that these men, you know, these young men would, back to becoming an old buck though. Back to becoming an old buck. They're sometimes you got to escape some of this kind of stuff by chance so that you then become an old buck. But then there's the thing that you just never had what it took in the first place. You know, it's just hard to say. But it says, as they slept, a group of 15 Delawares and 2 Shawnees and at least 3 Cherokees watched from the woods. The Indians had been to a gathering of tribes to discuss the threat to their hunting ground from white settlers. No doubt the Indians were angered by the news of a large incursion into their territories. At about dawn, they fired into the sleeping group, killing the Mendenhall boys immediately. They were the lucky ones. Crabtree and the hired man named Drake were wounded but fled into the forest. Crabtree and the other hired man, James Boone and Henry Russell, were shot in the hips and couldn't run. The slave named Adam hid in some brush and witnessed what followed. While the slave named Charles was frozen with fear, the Indians plundered the supplies and gathered the horses. But 1 or 2 of the braves began to slash at the wounded and crippled boys with their knives. A fever of anger and cruelty seemed to build in the Indians as James and Henry tried to fend off the blades with their hands. Maybe it was the sight of blood on their mangled hands that incited the braves to greater cruelty. James recognized one of the torturing Indians as a Shawnee named Big Jim, whom he had met before. In fact, Big Jim had been befriended by the Boone family. Nathan Boone later told Lyman Draper this. James pleaded with Big Jim to spare him, but the Shawnee's response was to begin pulling out James's fingernails. The slave named Adam watched in horror as both James and Henry begged to be killed and not tortured further. James cried out for his mother and then screamed that he was afraid his family farther up the trail had been attacked also. The other Indians were in a hurry to get going with their plunder. Only a small number participated in the torture. Finally, the boys' skulls were beaten in with tomahawks and their bodies shot full of arrows. The arrows were not just a ritual, but also a warning, a calling card, to show who had killed them, and a sign of the fate of any who trespassed on Indian territory. When the Indians left, they took the slave Charles with them. Ironically, the bodies were discovered that morning by a young man from Boone's party who had stolen a pack of deerskins and was riding back to the settlements. Son of a bitch. Seeing the bloody and mangled bodies, he galloped back to the camp and warned those just awakening. Fearing an imminent attack, Boone organized the men for defense, building a rude fort of brush and felled logs, and sent Squire back with a party to bury the dead. Rebecca gave Squire 2 linen sheets to wrap around the mutilated bodies. Before Squire and his party got to the scene, Russell and his group had already arrived there. They wrapped the Mendenhalls in one sheet and James and Henry in the other, and buried them in one grave under logs to keep the wolves from reaching them. Adam, who had witnessed the torture scene and murders, wandered stunned in the woods for 11 days before he showed up to tell his gruesome tale.
Jeez.
Crabtree, who had been wounded only slightly, appeared in Castlewood about a week later. The slave Charles was found with his head split in two about 40 miles farther on.
Jeez.
Charles should have ran.
Yeah. Maybe that's what ended up happening. He did try to run later, and they got him.
Bones thought to be those of the hired man Drake were found nearby 20 years later. Drake didn't get very far either. It took days to round up the scattered cattle while the people tried to recover from the attack. The men called a council, and it was decided they were too small a party to proceed to the Cumberland Gap with the Indian threat so great. Discouraged, they returned to the Clinch River, and many went back to their homes in the Yadkin. But Boone and his family stayed on the Clinch River in a cabin lent to them by David Gass. They would remain there in the area for almost 2 years until Boone could organize a larger effort to settle in Kentucky.
Jeez. They all died and they just had to go back. That sucks.
It says that Lord Dunmore demanded that those who had perpetrated the torture and murders be punished. The colonial Indian agent sent his deputy Alexander Cameron to the Cherokees at the town of Choti to deliver the order. After much argument and opposition from the young braves, it was decided that a chief named Tawagan was the guilty one and should be put to death. Tawagan was first wounded by his appointed executioners, but left alive. His relatives tried to protect him from further harm, but Alexander Cameron demanded that the sentence be carried out, and after much haranguing, Tawagan was finally killed. One other Cherokee who had taken part in the massacre escaped to live with the Chickasaws, but was later caught and also executed. Big Jim returned north to the Shawnee towns. The chiefs warned the young Indians that this would be the fate of any who engaged in such acts of cruelty. Lord Dunmore expressed his satisfaction with the Cherokee conduct, a remarkable instance of their good faith and strict regard to justice. The Shawnees were named by Dunmore as the main instigators of the episode, but the Shawnee Big Jim would go unpunished until he met his death in another clash with whites 13 years later in the Ohio. Anger against the white invaders seemed to spread among the young warriors of all tribes: Cherokee, Mingo, Shawnee, Delaware, Wyandot. A companion of young Simon Kenton was killed at their camp near the Kanawha. A party of hunters in Kentucky led by Gilbert and Robert Christian was attacked by a band of Cherokees led by Tom Benge. At first, pretending friendship, the Indians fired on their hosts in the camp and killed 4 hunters. The Christian brothers escaped, angered by the attack on Wallens Creek, where he had been wounded. Isaac Crabtree killed 3 Cherokees at a social gathering at Watauga and then escaped to Kentucky, aggravating the already tense conditions on the frontier. The murder of the Boone and Russell boys seemed to set off a chain reaction of killing on both sides. Someone who saw Boone on the Clinch River at this time described him as wearing deerskin-colored black and had his hair plaited and clubbed up and was on his way to or from Powell's Valley. Apparently, Boone wore his hair long but plaited all his life. What does that mean? P-L-I-T-E-D.
P-L-I?
T-E-D. Apparently, Boone wore his hair
Pleated?
long. Plaited. P-L-A-I-T-E-D. Clubbed meant the braid was tied in a kind of knot behind his head. Clubbed meant the braid was, so he had braids, and then it was tied in a knot. While he lived in David Gass's cabin on the Clinch, Boone spent much of his time hunting in the nearby mountains.
He braided it. It literally says taking 3 strands of hair or more and attach them to a special pattern. But I think in that specific instance, it's talking about ponytails.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah, that's what it sounds like. And then they take that ponytail and they even tie it into a knot. So they braid it into a ponytail as well, and then they tie it into a knot at the base or something.
Dude, long hair. It's a struggle.
It says that in the spring of 1774, Boone went alone to hunt in Powell's Valley and to visit the grave of his son, James. He pushed aside the logs over the grave when he arrived. Scratching in the ground with a stick, he decided to see if the bodies had been disturbed. Wolves had not reached the bodies, and the features of the boys were still distinguishable.
Jeez.
Blood still visible, on their cut and burned heads. James Boone's hair was blonde while Russell's was very dark. Boone dug the grave a little deeper and replaced the log covering. According to Lyman Draper, there suddenly arose a severe storm, which lasted some considerable time. During its continuance, from the melancholy associations and gloominess of the place, mingled with the dismal howlings of the storm, Boone felt more dejected, as he used afterwards to relate, than he had ever felt in all his life. That's a quote from Boone, it is said. Later, as he made camp and tried to sleep, he heard Indians prowling about. Was a man like superhuman? Nathan told Draper the sadness of the place made Boone feel worse than he had ever felt before. Whenever the death of James was mentioned, he was visibly moved. In the dark, he packed up and left, leaving the bell on his horse, sounding so that the Indians would think it was just grazing until he got some distance away. Then he rode quickly to put distance between himself and the scene.
Smart. Dang.
Sneaky man.
Well, folks, I'd like to apologize for this bummer of an episode. You weren't kidding, dude. That is sad.
Yeah, I mean, here you are. So this is something to think about. Like, you know, we live in such a safe world today.
Mm-hmm.
In such a, you know, we really do have.
I like to call it a nerfed world.
Yeah, I mean, look, we can live long lives and we're rarely under the threat of violence from other people, unless you live in New York, I suppose, and LA. But, you know, generally speaking, we live in a very safe nation. And if you're in America, but here, the reality, people, it's kill or be killed. There's a lot of that going on. And there's a lot of, you know, you have Big Jim over there.
Who knows who that kid is?
Friends with the family, has had dinner over there, spent time with them, and then decides to go along with this other crowd of. This is what gangs and mobs do. How people behave in the throes of a gang, as if they don't have personal accountability for what's happening because they're just going along with the group. Atrocities are committed, lynchings, you know, terrible things are done in mobs. It escalates into this horrible, cruel act, but it didn't start out, it seems, quite that way. It just got there over time. And then once these Indians were in it, they're in it. They might as well just go full out, you know. The point is, though, these, you know, Boone and the family and so forth, they're trying to carve out an existence, and they're trying to get theirs, and they're not. He's in debt. He has his world. He's trying to make a go, you know, and a lot of these people are, and they don't know if they're going to get sick or die next month, you know, or what's going to happen, killed by Indians. And the Indians are over there trying to protect their way of life as well. And you just have two opposing forces against each other. And then there's all the friendships and alignment and agreements that they have between each other as well. But even the Indians, it's not like the Indians aren't killing other Indians. Like they're like, they'll do the same thing to an Indian as they do a white man. It's not like it's the white people against the Indians.
It's everyone against everyone.
It's groups against groups.
I mean, like, even these early settlers are still fighting amongst each other. I mean, maybe not physically, but definitely financially and trying to get lands. Like, they're playing each other dirty left and right.
Well, there's definitely physical as well. You know that there's like might is right philosophy among many that are stealing horses. And earlier in the book, we read about how, you know, the white outlaws were far worse than the Indian outlaws, you know, especially in the early 1700s. But it's a reminder, right? Like, we live in a decadent time, at least so far. You know, who knows what next year will bring or the year after. I mean, we could have a rude awakening soon. We have the threat of nuclear something happening. Like, who knows the capacity for which things could change on the global scale. It's, you know, it can easily happen. And it seems like human beings have a short memory of the past. And so they'll repeat it over and over. But here, you know, it is a reminder of to be grateful for what you have today. And also not to judge the people of the past so harshly. You know, they lived in a different time, and you got to put yourself in those shoes before you cast judgment, you know. But anyway, that's today's story. So Boone loses, I think it's his oldest son, James. That's going to haunt him. And back to just,
They were so close to camp.
back to just survival in general. You know, the quote, the paranoid survive. Keep that in mind. Just always keep it in mind. That's why when I'm called, let's say, a conspiracy theorist, I'm like, call me what you want. The paranoid survive. And that's how you survive when you're in the mountains, in grizzly country, or where you could freeze to death, fall in a river and drown, fall off a cliff, be injured. Like, the paranoid survive. Having multiple ways to start a fire, having the skills to build a fire, you know, without much in terms of equipment, having the equipment to send messages, redundant levels of equipment, redundant options for, like, let's say, a flashlight and things like that. Like, more than one gun, you know, a handgun in conjunction with a rifle, or however it is that you're out there, enough ammunition, you know, all that. Like, it just keeps going back to the paranoid survive, the prepared survive, those that are more skilled survive. And we read about Neely, you know, firing off all of his bullets and his powder, and you're just like, those who panic don't survive. And you think of James, and he was young, James Boone. And you wonder, had the situation been that Daniel Boone was there, Daniel Boone may have got himself out of that by his attitude, by his confidence. I don't know. They shot him in their sleeping bags, you know, or their bedding, I should say. We don't know exactly how or when. Were they get shot in the hips, you know, like, again, but why were you all in a position where you could get shot in the first place? Why did you make yourselves such easy freaking targets? Was there no resistance brought up at all? It looks like there wasn't. So being paranoid, they wouldn't have fallen into the hands that they did. And it's a shame that they weren't more paranoid and they didn't behave accordingly.
Sometimes, you know, they don't make it to be old bucks.
Yeah. Absolutely true. So, and it's easy to judge as an jaded older man. I dodged some bullets
200 or 300
myself.
years into the future.
Yeah. I mean, even in my youth, there are things I did with, like, Cousin Ben, jumping off bridges and cliff diving and climbing stuff I should not. There are many times.
Adventure.
There are many times when I should be dead and didn't die, and then learned from that and said, I'm not doing that ever again. That was the dumbest thing ever. You narrowly escape death. And then you're like, yeah, free climbing that 100-foot wall was the dumbest idea ever.
Yep.
You know, thankfully those things you got by, and then
Do you remember the rope swing Ben put up years ago?
Yeah.
It was right before, I can't remember, but I was probably 14 or 15, was going out, and this rope swing is like on a hill. And it had been there for a couple of years. It had gotten mossy, and my hand slipped. And if I would have let myself fall, I would have fallen 10 feet. But the end of the rope, about that much of it, was frayed, and I panicked, and I grabbed it, and I swung out for another 3 or 4 more seconds, and so it went from a 10-foot fall to like a 20-foot fall. And I went flying, hit a tree, slid down the tree. Got some bruised ribs, but
what's funny about that is you are the same age. I mean, we're 15 years apart or so. And that, I believe it's the same swing, because it was there for years, just a big rope.
Big rope.
It had a loop in it because we would put our arms through it and swing out there and hold on to it. It was easier to hold on to that loop. And our cousin Blake, who was, I think, 8 years old, the younger kids would hold on to the loop with 2 hands because they weren't strong enough, but they put their chin on it, on the loop, so it's like a noose, and they would hold on and swing around. And they would just kind of hold on and swing out and swing back when their arms got tired. And you don't want to drop because it was on a cliff, so or on a steep incline. So as you swung out, you got 20, 30 feet off the ground, and he just came back in. You were like right there. This is sort of smart things that we did, is build swings like that, or rope swings.
It's when you're poor, you come up with ways to have fun.
But we found Blake hanging from it, and he died, and he was, I think, 8. When our cousin saw him there, he had turned blue. He wasn't gone yet, but he didn't have enough oxygen. The brain was dead. And when, so he passed away. You can kind of know what happened. You know, he was swinging, he had his head in the loop, and he, one way or another, thought he could push his head through, or just was curious, or, you know, it wasn't intentional. That's not, I mean, he's
an 8, he didn't have the concept.
Somehow, or he was getting tired and he pushed his head through, got stuck. And it was just the right size. And he never lived to be an old buck.
Yeah.
You know, so these things are, you do stupid things like that, and you're like, well, you know, he was alone at the time. The kids were swinging together. They ran down to the house. He swung by himself for 5 or 10 minutes. Kids came back, and
it wasn't long.
So these things happen. And like I said, sometimes, you know, when you're young like that and you learn, you need a little luck so that you get past those stages so you can live to be the old buck. But that's it's life, right? So James didn't make it, and that was a source of heartache for Boone for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I don't think you can get over that.
So, Brent, always keep in mind that the paranoid survive. Be a survivor. Be paranoid in a good way. And be grateful. Be grateful for the world you live in today, because we live in a wonderful time. All said and done, it's pretty cool. That said, what a time it would have been to live in Boone's time. What's crazy, though, you could say Boone got lucky because he died at, age 86? Or you could say the paranoid survive. Like, he got there for a reason. You wonder how Boone would have handled that situation, being more mature, being older, wiser, more stoic, more brave, perhaps, than James. How he could have handled that situation. When I read that book on natives, you know, Indians taking, you know, kidnapping, whether it's from another tribe or from whites, it didn't matter. Like, they seem to just despise weakness in people. They seem to, as a culture, as a whole, like, admire a brave warrior type person. Doesn't mean they wouldn't kill them, but at the same time, your odds of surviving if you showed weakness was next to 0. You know, it was not good. But if you showed courage and like, they truly admired that. And so James crying and weeping for his mother probably didn't help the cause at all. It's hard to say, but had he responded in a different way, it's hard to say. Boone seems like he had enough charm and wit to have completely got himself out of it. And again, you could say that Boone living to be 86 years old was just an accident, or just luck of the draw, or providential. And probably there is a lot there. It's all those things. I think you got to stop calling something lucky when it happens over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I have people that I follow that are hunters, and people want to attribute some of these guys, just because they don't like them, to being lucky all the time. Dude, just lucky, or he just got this favor, he just got that, or just, no, the dude just can do it. And you got, at some point, you got to quit saying it's luck. But people want to say he got lucky, because if they could say that, it's not an indictment on themselves. If I admit that individual just has more talent than me, or finds a way to make it happen in a way that I don't, then it's an indictment on me. I have to say, okay, if I'm competing with this individual, in a sense, or I'm comparing myself or benchmarking my abilities against someone else's who's skilled, it's like, I got to acknowledge the reality if I want to grow, and then pay attention as a student and try to learn what they've got. You just can't go, well, he just gets to spend 20 days out there every year and I don't. So that means that's why. Perhaps, but he also set up his life so that that's a reality. Mm-hmm. He also put in those hours. And if he spends 20 or 30 days a year after 5 years and you spend 5 days a year, the hours spent start to accumulate into genuine knowledge, genuine ability. You can't keep saying, well, he just had more fortunate circumstances. At some point, he's actually laid a foundation for what he is today. He is something, he's a well of knowledge. So anyway, rambling on and on, but that's the show for today. Tune in next time. We appreciate you sticking with us and hanging out with us. And, thank you. Leave us a comment. We'll try to get back to you, on the videos. We try to respond to all those comments. Leave us a comment there. And thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Hello, friends. I hope you're enjoying our new Dueling Pistols podcast. Remember, it's only here temporarily on the Gritty channel.
Short time.
If you want to subscribe to the main show, head on over to our YouTube channel, Dueling Pistols, and subscribe over there. And anywhere that you get your podcast, you can subscribe there. Thanks for supporting us.
We're on all platforms.
Yeah, we're out there. Find it over there. And tell a friend.
Yeah.
Tell a friend about our new show.
Tell all your friends.
Help us grow it bigger.
We're just going to turn this to an ASMR.
All right. Thanks, guys. Catch you on the next episode.